everyone, and welcome to the Dog Sports Decoded podcast. My name is Megan Ritchie, and today I'm talking with scent detection expert Carrie McAunaul about about how you can get started with scent detection and how to train your dog with the goal to one day compete. So welcome, Carrie.
Thank you very much, Megan. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you because I know I have my own personal questions I'm hoping you can answer, so hopefully for a lot of other people as well. So Carrie's a well-known expert when it comes to scent detection, and she's graciously consented to do this interview to share her extensive knowledge with us, so we can all understand how to get started and prepare for our first scent detection trial. So thanks again for joining us.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I guess jump right in. First place to start would be, how did you get started with scent detection?
Well, about 12 years ago, I decided I wanted to learn search and rescue. I used to be involved with, like, me being a search and rescue tech and ice rescue tech. And with my love of dogs, I thought, hey, let's go forward and start working with search and rescue dogs. So the dog that I had at the time, strangest combination you'll ever hear, it was a German Shepherd English Mastiff cross.
Okay.
So she looked like a giant yellow lab, which deceived me into thinking that she would, perform like a lab. And I wanted to she loved snow. So I wanted to get into avalanche rescue, and with being close to the mountains, and I thought that'd be super cool. So I started getting into scent theory and tracking and all sorts of really cool stuff like that, leading up to learning how to do avalanche rescue. And my wonderful dog, who I loved so very much, went from using the German Shepherd part of her brain when she hit 2 years old to using the Mastiff part of her brain, and she just did not want to work. Yeah. So I had some base knowledge that I was super excited about. We'd done some tracking classes, which we were doing not too bad, and especially when she was looking for me, but starting to progress a little bit. And then I just, I realized that this is not the dog to be doing this with. So I continued learning because I found it fascinating as far as, how they find people and how odor moves through, especially through the snow because it's so porous, and waited till I got my next dog. Yeah. So a couple of years down the line, I get my next dog, who was a German Shepherd, which is my breed of choice. And she really enjoyed tracking. We were actually doing quite well with tracking. And you can hear my German Shepherd now whining because she's not part of the call. Yeah. She loved tracking, but at that point I discovered scent detection, like the scent discrimination. And I thought this would be a super cool business opportunity. I knew they hired private civilian dogs for going on the rigs and all sorts of other stuff. And then I learned about bed bug detection, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. So I started getting into scent detection then, more specifically rather than human tracking. And I had a dog who had absolutely no interest. She had zero interest in learning scent detection. Yeah. So we tracked, and she loved it. She absolutely loved it, and she was quite good at it. But I've got the bug now. Yeah. I want to do scent detection. So my next dog, another German Shepherd, who unfortunately had some health issues and wasn't able, but he was the first dog that I competed with. Mm-hmm. And boy, did I learn a lot, and I'm here to help. I'm here to share that information on what not to do. Yeah. He wasn't suited for this. Like I said, he had some health issues. So unfortunately, he was also not the dog to compete with. And now I have Glitch, who is 4 years old in September and a little superstar. So I finally got the dog that I wanted to compete with. Yeah. And by this point in time, I had learned so much from my mistakes that I was able to transfer all that knowledge onto this dog, and we're succeeding, which is wonderful. It's a great feeling.
Awesome. So this has nothing to do with the podcast, I guess, the topic, but I was just interested because you brought it up. So search detection, how did you search and rescue? How did you get into that? Like, was that my understanding is it's a little harder to get into, like, if I don't know if you have to be with the police or.
It is. So I was a firefighter.
Okay.
And so that's when I got into search and rescue, and most search and rescue operations are civilian based.
Yeah.
So, but you also learn a lot of the technical aspects through the fire department. So I got my ice rescue tech certificate through the fire department. Super fun, especially for somebody. My biggest fear in life is drowning.
Okay.
So having to stand on some thin ice and fall through, like walk out until you fall through it, is
Yeah.
terrifying. But I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, so
Yeah.
it was amazing. But you learn your climbing, you learn your knots, you learn rappelling, you learn ice rescue, you learn all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
So that's how I was involved with that.
Okay, interesting. And then I've heard kind of the bed bug side before, which maybe people listening haven't, but I haven't heard about the rigs. So what do they do on the rigs for scent detection?
It's mostly like searching the camps for drugs and things like that. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So
most of those are done by civilian groups. Yeah.
When on the tracking side, I've certainly heard people doing it for like to find missing pets or dogs lost in the wilderness. So again, it's kind of a business or civilian type operation. So it's interesting. There's a lot of avenues people can go down those roads. And so
there is, and it's when you have a sport dog, you're paying to play. When you have a working dog, you're being paid to play. But essentially, it's the exact same skill set.
Same training.
So, yeah.
Okay. I think you answered my other kind of introductory question. It sounds like you went through quite a few dogs to get kind of the dream competition dog, which I think happens to a lot of us, but yeah.
So I'm extremely competitive for one. And it's funny. I temper that because I'm super happy with everybody else that gets to win. I'm there to celebrate their wins as well, but man, am I competitive, and especially against my closest friends. We're constantly doing this with each other to see who can one up. So, but it's all done with a good sense of humor and with grace, which is really important. And honestly, with scent detection, I'd say about 90% of the dogs out there can play. I just happened to have one dog that had no interest, and I had another dog who had health issues. So those dogs, obviously the one was just like, nah, don't want to do it, but let me track humans. And the other one, it just wasn't fair to him. So yes, I went through a number of dogs, but honestly, I'd say about 90% of the pet dogs out there can play. They can't necessarily play all levels, but they can definitely get out and play.
Yeah, I'll say even both of my guys, different ages, totally different personalities. They both really enjoy the sport at our very low level that we've done it at. So it definitely seems like any dog can basically get into it and try it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So I guess before we get too far into kind of the details of scent detection, we probably should explain what it is.
Hey, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So scent detection, nose work, there's so many different names for it. It is the discrimination of a particular target odor. And because even if you have a completely blank room, the second a human walks in there, you've got all sorts of other odors now circulating through the room. So they need to discriminate against a dynamic background. So you teach them their target odor and they find it in whatever scenario you put them in. So that's the nitty gritty basics of it.
Right. And I guess the way I've kind of come to think of it myself, and you've given us a couple examples already, but would be like drug detection, bomb detection, that sort of thing. It's kind of where it came from. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and one of the big things is, and one I discovered when I started looking into this to do it as a full-time job, which, is a dream job. I had actually started training one dog for a cadaver as well. This is one that ended up having health issues. So I started out training him as a cadaver dog, but we're in Canada. Our population's fairly low. So there's not a huge call for that outside of the professional agencies like the RCMP. And there are search and rescue organizations that have cadaver dogs. So while it's really cool to do, it's not something that you can do as a full-time job simply because we have such a low population compared to landmass. In the US, there's all sorts of opportunities. because their population is a lot denser. So they need more on the civilian side to help out with things like that. And there's more job opportunity that way.
Yeah, that's a friend was kind of telling me she had done a little bit of that, and that's another fascinating kind of rabbit hole to go down, the cadaver.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I love cadaver work.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. But I guess the thing that surprised me the most with it was she was saying some of the dogs can get kind of almost PTSD from it if they do it too much.
Very much. Yeah,
so
very much.
Kind of understandable, but kind of an interesting side effect.
You need the right dog. You need a very resilient dog. This happened with September 11th as well. The dogs that were looking for live finds at the World Trade Center, right. To keep their spirits up, because dogs are emotional. They've got, the emotional equivalent of a 4-year-old essentially.
Yeah.
So when they're not finding anything, they're not finding anybody alive, they would hide one of the other search and rescue techs for them to find, to give them a big reward and pump them back up. Right. And with cadaver dogs, because you tend to train with a fairly small amount of human remains, and it can be very overwhelming when they find their first body, and they can end up with PTSD. You need an extremely resilient dog and an extremely resilient handler, and that actually plays in with the sports side of things as well when you get up to the higher levels. Yeah.
Okay, I guess on to happier topics.
Yes, on to much happier topics.
So I guess one of the things kind of I wanted to get out of this conversation today was, I know there's quite a few different governing bodies, and I've been very confused by what they all are, if they're different, what the differences are in between. So do you want to maybe walk us through kind of who the main organizations you use are, or?
Absolutely. Okay, so I mainly compete in the SDDA. It's one of the governing bodies. It's Canadian based, which is super cool. Sport Detection Dogs Association. They have a certain set of odors. They've got their 3 essential oils that they use and their own set of rules. So you do an interior, an exterior, and container searches. Essentially, most of the governing bodies are very similar. It's just a different set of rules. Sometimes they have different odors, and sometimes the setups are different. But it comes down to basically read the rule book for whatever you're going to compete in. Read the rule book, because it comes down to use of equipment as well. CKC is the same. It's containers, interiors, exteriors. Your exterior can be vehicle searches, which I find super fun. And that's just the outside of a vehicle, not the inside of a vehicle. ABC Games, which is, again, a different set of essential oils. But the way they set theirs up is you do an interior, exterior, containers, and vehicle, but they're all kind of mashed together. So it's super cool, and it is the biggest adrenaline rush if you've never done it before, because it's overwhelming and fun.
Yeah.
Because you're competing with the same thing, but all of your components are mashed together. So it's lots of fun. CWAGs is another league, again, with a different set of oils. And the way they've set it up, it's like a league. So you're not doing an entire trial all at once. You're going in and doing individual components of different levels, and then you progress through at your pace. And I've been trying to get into that, but it hasn't worked out time-wise for me. So I'm hoping this fall I'll finally get into CWAG's league. And UKC is another one that, again, and there's about 8 or 9 different essential oils. So, and actually once you've got your dog imprinted on one, it's fairly easy to get them imprinted on the other ones. And so UKC, same kind of thing, containers, interior, exterior. So they really come down to minor changes in rules, minor changes in equipment use, and how often the trials are being held. So.
Okay, so I guess kind of summary in my own head. So scent detection, nose work, sport detection, they're all kind of roughly the same thing. So if we see class advertised as one of those things, we're kind of looking at the same Same sport in general.
Yeah,
Okay.
essentially your dog is discriminating an odor out of an environment and alerting you and telling you it's there.
Okay.
So yeah, so basically.
And if somebody's like, they've signed up for a class, something like that, my assumption is going to be likely the instructor or the area has a association that's more common that people compete in. So chances are you're going to compete in whatever association your instructor kind of gears towards, or is it more flow than that?
It's so generally, so I initially introduced SDDA and CKC rules because they're very, very similar. And when I teach a class, I'm just introducing the odor, period. As the dog starts to learn how to target the odor, that's when I bring in the rules of the game and how to play the game, and letting them know that there are different associations. So currently my class, I have 2 students that are going to be competing at the end of July. So I'm super excited for them. And that's a huge, huge rush for me when I see somebody that I've taught go and compete. That's almost better than me winning.
Yeah,
almost.
I think that's true for most teachers, right? You're so happy to see your students do well and
succeed.
The dog you've helped.
Yeah. So I start out by teaching the basics, and then we work up to how to work the containers, the rooms, the exteriors in a competition setting.
Right.
So it's not super intimidating right off the bat.
Right. That's fair to say. Like, I'm glad you kind of brought it up, because it's sort of in my experience, the first, I'll say, I don't know, 3 classes, something like that, is purely kind of scent introduction. So you're starting with boxes or whatever that have the scent, and you're not really following the rules at that point per se. You're just introducing the scent. Yeah. Okay.
And building the drive and you know, working on the skills to recognize your body, the dog's body language and how it changes when they get into odor.
Right. And you've talked a fair bit about the essential oils, so maybe we should just talk about that now.
Hey, that's good.
I'll ask you about it later, but yeah, we kind of got into that. So there are different oils that we train the dogs on typically for these sports. So because we're not using narcotics and things like that. And each association has its own oils, and there's quite a bit when it comes to the handling. So for a class, my experience is I haven't had to do that side, but it is quite, you have to be quite rigorous in what you do so you can kind of teach the dog properly.
Oh, yes. This is something I stress so much, because one of the things that I've seen throughout my working in scent detection, especially on the sports side of it, is sloppy handling of odor. So much like COVID right now, they've been comparing it to glitter. If you have 10 friends and one person uses glitter, 10 people now have glitter on them, and then they take it home and so on and so forth. It's the same thing with odor, but we can't see it.
Yes.
So when I prepare my odors and I handle my odors, I wear 2 pairs of gloves. So I'll just go through this step by step. I put on 2 pairs of gloves. I take my essential oil. I put 1 drop on a Q-tip, and I put that Q-tip in a carrier. So that carrier can be a piece of a straw, in a metal T-ball. So basically I'm just making sure it doesn't contaminate anything that it touches. And then I put my lid back on my essential oil. I put that essential oil inside a Pelican case, but the small Pelican cases, and I close that. So I have a double barrier. Then I put that inside another case that contains all of my different essential oils. So now, because I've handled my odor, I have oil on my hands, whether you think you do or not. So I peel off the 1 pair of gloves. I still have a pair of gloves left. Just it's one less step later on. I take that, the carrier, whether it's a straw or the T-ball or a little tin, and then I will go making sure that I only touch it with 1 hand. So if I have to move anything with this hand, I'm not contaminating the area with odor. I'm not contaminating the area with direct human scent, contact DNA. And then I will actually go and hide the odor using the 1 hand. I plan ahead where I'm going to put the odor so that I'm not putting it in different places and then changing my mind. Because the more you contaminate an area, the harder it is for the dog to get a very clear picture of where their nose should go. So if your odor is here and you've put it here, 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 and here, they're going to be very confused, especially at the beginning, because odor is odor, whether it's trace odor or residual odor, it's still an odor your dog is trained on. So handling the odor is critical to set your dog up for success.
And I assume you kind of touched on this a little bit, but like the beginning stages, I don't want to say it's more important, but if you've got 8 boxes set up and you're, you know, quickly moving, alternating where the odor is in kind of that order of 8 boxes, the scent isn't sitting there for very long, so it becomes more important because you're moving it more often. Like it's not giving the scent time to dissipate. Like if you were to move it and leave it set there somewhere for 8 hours and then come test your dog on it. Am I making any sense at all?
A little bit. So it's pooling odor. So odor's going to spread. It's not static. It's a very dynamic thing. You open a door, the odor moves. So you're going to get little tendrils like an octopus going out. If it's making sure that you're containing it in that box, is essential. And if you are moving it around, it doesn't have as much time to pool out of the box and contaminate the area. So you are right in that. It's, if you leave an odor in one place longer, it's going to spread a lot further.
Okay. I feel like we should go back to the beginning now. So who should try this sport? Because we haven't really talked about that a whole lot.
Anybody with a dog, really. Like I said, you'll know in your first set of classes if your dog is going to be interested enough in it to compete or interested enough even to play. I have had dogs come into class that just have zero interest. I owned a dog that had zero interest. So I just found something else for her to do. But that is fairly rare. So everybody can try it. Everybody can come out and play, even if it's something just to get your dog to have something to do. And especially with COVID, when we were in complete lockdown, I've got a high drive, 3.5, almost 4-year-old German Shepherd, to not take her out and do all the stuff that we normally do. And we're really active. I would just set out some odors and send her through the house to find them. And that's one of the really great things about scent work, is because it's an independent thinking exercise. They use their brain a lot more and they get tired. Mine doesn't, but most dogs get very, very tired afterwards and they'll crash out completely. So it's a great exercise for them.
That's one of the things I've really come to, I don't know, value in the scent work sports, because it does tire them out so quickly mentally. So even if you have like an older dog, but they're like still a high energy breed, but maybe they can't take that like hard impact on their joints anymore. It's a great one. Riggs.
And that, oh, sorry, I was going to say that's a really great point, because we've got dogs that are starting in this sport at 12 years old. Because it is something that they can come out, they can play, they can win. I love ribbons. I'm not gonna lie, I love ribbons. So I'm in it for the ribbons. And I'm in it to play with my dog. This is my dog's favorite thing to do. She absolutely loves it. And we have so much fun together doing it. And she started, her first competition was at 7 months old. But like I said, we've got dogs that are coming in that are 12 years old that are like, hey, I can do this, because it's not a heavy impact sport.
Well, that's what I love. Like if you have an agility dog or a flyball dog and maybe you're kind of retired them from that sports, like they still need that time with you and something to do to keep them busy. And it just seems like such a great option for people and for puppies too. That impact.
So I got my current dog. She came home on Halloween. It was really nice for 3 weeks, and then it dropped down to -30. Because it's Calgary. And so we needed stuff to do. And this was one of the things that we did in the house to keep her little crazy working dog puppy brain, engaged, and not letting her tiny little body have to go out in the cold to really burn off her energy. Because she just couldn't handle going from 20 degrees above to 20 degrees below when she was so tiny. So it's great for winter. It's great to keep them engaged over winter and without, having to do as much physical activity outside.
So how would you recommend somebody get started? Like, classes were how I got started. I'm a little bit intimidated handling the oils myself. Is it something somebody can do on their own?
So I would highly recommend taking a class. I started out with a seminar from Don Blair. He's out of Chicago. He knows more about scent detection. He's forgotten more about scent detection than I'll ever know. He had a kennel supplying dogs to the U.S. Border Services before they amalgamated and did all the stuff down there. So I started with a seminar. And it was an absolutely fantastic opportunity to learn from a professional. And again, this was when I had the dog that had no interest in it. So with that, I highly recommend people take a class. It's the best way for an introduction. You don't have to put out for the boxes, the oils, everything else. It's supplied for you. And you get to see if you're interested in it and if your dog is interested in it. Because there are people that have come to class that their dog is like super pumped to do it, but they're like, man, and it's not for them. And I get that, because there's a lot of things that aren't for me, regardless if my dog can do it or not. So taking an introduction class is really important. And one thing I do want to mention is, when you're taking an introduction class, make sure that you are being introduced to an odor, not necessarily a toy or food. Toys and food your dog's going to find on their own. Teaching a target odor to find like a specific novel odor is a very different approach. So if you just want to have your dog find toys and food, there's some really cool classes for that. But if you want to compete, I would highly recommend taking one that introduces the odor right off the bat. That's if you want to compete. That's strictly if you want to compete. The other classes are super, super fun. The dogs have a great time, but it's kind of counterproductive to competing further down the line.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I know I've seen some of those more on the trick side, like do more with your dog or something like that. They have it as a trick game, or people do it to keep their dogs just busy in the winter, kind of like you're mentioning with your puppy. But it doesn't help maybe with the competition side.
Not for and that's just it. And that's strictly on a competition level. If you want to take your dog to compete, it's a very different approach. And while it is super cool and it's fun to watch them, and you do learn a lot about recognizing the change in behavior with your dog when they find something, like I said, it ends up being counterproductive later on.
Okay. And is it easy for people generally to find classes? Is there somewhere they can go to look them up? Like, do some of the associations tell?
Most of the associations actually don't list classes. I teach out at Hightails Pet Resort, just out by Balzac. Fantastic facilities, probably one of the best facilities I've taught in. The area is phenomenal. So I teach out there. Some of the sporting detection websites will allow people to advertise their classes. There doesn't seem to be a database anywhere that I've found that really advertises who's who. So a lot of it's word of mouth, going to competitions, finding out who taught those. So it's very much word of mouth right now.
And Dr. Google.
And Dr. Google, yes. Yes, we all love Dr. Google.
Okay. And so if somebody's taken a class, they've enjoyed it, their dog's doing well, how would they know when they're ready to compete? Like, what are you looking for?
Okay, so there's a couple of avenues here. My two students from this current class are going to compete strictly to see what it's like for them. So they're doing it as an experience rather than looking to win everything.
Yes.
I go in looking to win everything, but I'll get to that in a minute. So these two particular students, they want to see if their dogs are ready, because there's, they get comfortable in a classroom, such a scenario, they get comfortable at home. So now you're taking your dog and putting them into an entirely new situation. There's a lot of excitement, there's other dogs, there's people that are stressed out because trial nerves are a thing. They're a very real thing. So they're doing it to see how their dogs perform, and they're not expecting to win everything. They're, like I said, they're strictly going in to see the experience, for them to gain knowledge how a trial works, and to just judge what they need to work on. For me, I wanted my dog to win. And that was a very personal thing. Yes, it was my ego, absolutely. Try to take your ego out of dog sport, because man, you get humbled hard. Oh yeah. I've never been more humbled than by my dog. So I went in knowing that my dog was ready. She understood what she was supposed to do. She was consistent in what she was supposed to do. And it was completely on me. I called something far too early. I got way too excited. We call it the blurt alert, when you just blurt out alert, saying that the odor is there and your dog hasn't even finished searching. So we didn't win everything our first day. And I had to go back a second day to get that component. So my ego took a bit of a kicking, and it deserved it in many, many ways. So a lot of people will wait longer to go into a competition, and there's nothing wrong with that. If I have a student that I'm seeing their dog is excelling, their dog is just nailing it every time, and it comes down to the handler being nervous about entering, I'll kind of encourage them to enter. I don't encourage people to enter if they're not ready, unless they understand that they're going in as a learning experience.
I guess for me, even in other sports, I typically like to go in maybe earlier than I should, and it's more just so that my dog has a positive experience. So like you said, I'm not expecting to win, but we can go and see the environment, kind of figure out the rules and how it's set up, and keep things like less stress on me, because I'm not thinking we're going to win anything. Not to be terribly embarrassed. And so it's a good place to start, I think, where, with yourself, you've got more experience, so you kind of know the level of your dog. You're already kind of comfortable in that environment, so it's fair to have higher expectations maybe of yourself at that point.
So my first trial, let's go. My first trial experience. So like I said, I had a dog that had health issues. At the time, I didn't know he had the health issues. He was incredibly reactive. He was and that's one thing about the SDDA, is they do cater to reactive dogs, because this is a one dog at a time sport. So if you have a reactive dog and you're concerned, this is definitely a sport that you can get into. When I teach my classes, the dogs come in one at a time and we rotate them out. So it's kind of catered towards reactive dogs and gives them something that's going to build their confidence. So my puppy that I took in, well, he was almost a year old at the time. The reactivity, we were managing that. His confidence was really low. And it was something that we didn't communicate clearly enough to some of the other competitors. And we had people that were approaching him with other dogs, and it just spun him up and spun him up and spun him up. And of course that got my nerves even higher. And it was an awful experience. So something that I stress with all of my students, especially with a reactive dog, is communicate to the people at the trial that you have a reactive dog. The volunteers and the trial hosts are going to communicate that to everybody else, to give you the room to get your dog through and into the search area with as little stress as possible. So going into a trial for scent detection is communicate with everybody. And that can be intimidating. It can be really intimidating, but it's super important.
We're often embarrassed if we have a reactive dog, so it's hard to tell people, like, just my dog's not friendly, stay away.
Yeah. And that's just it. And you've got to advocate for your dog. So as embarrassing as it can be, most of us understand. Most of us have been there. There's very few people I don't know that haven't had a reactive dog or friends with reactive dogs. So and it's easy to say don't be embarrassed, but I was embarrassed. I was incredibly embarrassed. So I get it.
Yeah, for sure.
So learn from my mistakes.
It's usually the best way to learn if we can, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is entering their first trial, how do you recommend they start? Like, are there specific classes, or are you mandated to start at a certain level?
You are mandated. So most of them, most of the organizations are broken down into levels. So with the SDDA, for example, you have started, you have advanced, you have excellent, you have elite. And there's a huge jump in between each of them. It's not something you can just kind of skate by and figure out. So with started, and this goes pretty much across the board with the organizations, it's one odor and no distractions. So no food distraction, no toy distractions. And it's just, you find one odor in each of the components and you win. Sounds easy, doesn't it? So going into your first trial, and I think I got a little distracted here. So going into the first trial, being prepared to just find that one odor without really thinking about all of the other stuff is the thing to focus on. And know your rules. You've got to know your rules. So whatever association you're going to be going to compete in, read your rule book. I cannot stress that enough. So with SDDA, you can't have tags on your collar. And I volunteer at a lot of trials. I help out at a lot of trials. And if I am at the gate waiting for someone to go in, I look over their dog to make sure that they don't have a tightening collar. You can't even have a martingale. It has to be a flat buckle collar or a non-tightening harness. I make sure they don't have any tags on. I've had situations where I've got people at the start line taking their tags off their collar because I'm like, oh, you're going to get disqualified, right? And you don't want to get disqualified over something like that. So read your rule book before you go.
And I guess something like that, even as simple as taking the tags off, if that's the last thing you're thinking before you go in to compete, is like, oh my God, I have to get this off my dog. Like, you're already frazzled before you start.
Absolutely. So hopefully you've got somebody at the gate that's going to notice that before you get to the start line. But when you're that frazzled over something like taking your tags off, you're no longer focused. You're not prepared. You rush your dog. And I've rushed my dog going into a search, and it's just turned out disastrous.
Okay. And so would they do one, I don't want to say one run per day if they're entering their first trial, or do you have like multiple rounds you would do a day?
So you have the three components. You have your containers, interiors, and exteriors. And exterior can either be building search, like on the outside of a building. It can be like in a playground, or it can be vehicles. Like it can be anywhere outside. The trial host will let you know if it's a vehicle search. And there's rules to that. The odor can't be more than 6 inches under the car. It's not going to be more, it's started level. It's no more than 3 feet high anywhere throughout. So you come in, you'll do your containers first, and started, you always do containers, which is really good because it gets your dog focused. That's the first thing you start in with classes is learning how to do containers. So your dog's like, oh, this is familiar. I know what I'm doing, and they'll go and do it. Then you'll do your interior. And then you'll do your exterior, and you usually have a break between, because a lot of times you'll do your containers and then go immediately into your interior. Then you'll have a break while everybody runs through those, and then everybody goes and does the exterior. And again, it depends on the venue, how it's set up. It depends on the judge deciding, you know, which one you're going to do next. But in started, you know, you're going to start on containers every single time.
Right. So you do all three components in one day, but you're not doing like all three of those multiple times throughout the day. It's just one.
No.
Okay.
Not for SDDA, CKC, ABC. Well, ABC is completely different because all the components are mashed into one. It's so cool.
Yeah.
And I've only seen it. I haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
I was registered and then COVID, so
Yeah.
we still haven't done our ABC games, and I can't wait.
Yeah.
But most of them are, you'll just run those components. Often in a trial, depending if you have one or two judges and the size of the trial venue, you can maybe do started twice in a day.
Okay.
Usually it's once per day though. So you'll do your 3 components in one day. If you missed a component, you can go back the next day and try to get that component to get your title. And you do need all 3 components to get your title.
And all at the same trial, or?
No, so this is one of the cool things with most of them, is you can get your components, earn your components, and if you don't get it, you don't have to get all 3 in the same trial to get your title. So you can earn legs towards your title. But with SDDA, if you do get all 3 in the same day at the same trial, you get an SP, a special designation. So it's just a little bit of a, it's you want that. It's just a bit more of a push to get all 3 at the same time, but it's not necessary.
Okay.
Once you get into the higher levels, you have to get all 3 in the same trial, or you get nothing. You don't earn legs, you don't nothing.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at right now. So
yeah. Okay. I think we've touched on this already, so if you don't have anything to add, just tell me. But what mindset would you recommend people go into their first trial with?
Have fun with your dog.
Okay.
First and foremost, the trial is everything is about your dog. It's not about you. Like I said, ego will bring you down every single time. Yeah. Right here, been there, done that. The second I let my ego get in the way is when we lose every time. You're there to play with your dog. Yes, the ribbons are fun. The prizes are fun. All of that is fun. But the biggest thing to remember is you're there to have fun with your dog. Your dog doesn't care about a ribbon.
Yeah. Your
dog just cares about doing something with you. Yeah. And that's kind of the mindset, because now that I'm competing at elite, you have to go in with that mindset. You're just going in to play with your dog, because if you start getting hung up on it, that's when, like, this is talking about resilience in dogs and resilience in handlers. I've cried. I set myself an unrealistic expectation. I wanted to get my first elite title by the time my dog was 2. Yep. And yes, that's achievable. I know a lot of people that have done it, but elite is hard. It's unknown numbers of hides, and it's hard. It's really hard, and you have to get all 3 components at the same trial. So it was the last trial before my dog turned 2. We got our interior, or we got our containers. We got our exteriors, which was a clear. There was no odor in it whatsoever, and you have to call it clear.
Yeah.
Super nerve-wracking. Yeah. And then I went into my interiors. Yeah. So it was 2 separate rooms, 0 to 5 hides. We cleared the first room. We were the only dog and handler team to get past the first room. And we got into our second room, and I went completely against all of my training. I was so close, and I called an alert, and I knew she wasn't on it. Yeah. But it was just one of those, she's in odor, so I'm going to call it. It was nerves. It was the excitement. Yeah. And I heard the judge behind me say, where? And when they ask you where it is, you know your dog's not on it. And I started crying. I cried for an hour. I'm not kidding. I could not stop crying, because I had set such an unrealistic expectation on myself. Yeah. So that was hard. Yeah. And that was a huge lesson. And if I had a less resilient dog, that would have taken the life out of her. So I let her work back to source, and I partied with her as if we won. Yeah. And that's super important. Reward your dog like you win every time, even if you're not winning.
Because they don't know.
They don't know.
Yeah.
So like I said, I cried for about an hour afterwards. I could not stop the tears because I disappointed myself, and it was ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
It's hard. So we set ourselves those stretch goals, and we have to remember they are stretch goals.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've seen countless teams go into elite, and when their dog isn't getting it, because it's hard, it's a team sport, and this is where instead of your dog doing what it's told, your dog is telling you. So it's a complete opposite mindset. So if you've competed in other sports, you're telling your dog to do stuff, you're doing the obedience, you're doing whatever trained response. This is completely independent thinking and them communicating to you. So I've seen team after team go in, and if they didn't read their dog right, or their dog missed something, and there's been days, my dog is awesome, but I've watched her go over top an odor, excuse me, and come back the other way, not even an ear flick, just completely disregard the odor that's right there.
Yeah.
And dogs are sentient creatures with their own minds, and they're going to do what they want some days. But if I got upset about that now, you know, my dog doesn't really care. She's just there to play, and she's super resilient. But more sensitive dogs are going to start feeling that. So every time they step into the ring, they're going to shut down a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And you end up with a dog that doesn't want to play, that this isn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest things when you set your foot into that ring, is go in and have fun. If you don't win, that's okay. You did win because you walked to that ring, and you win because you're playing with your dog, period. So that's a huge mindset to make sure that you're going in with. And actually, since I changed my attitude with, okay, well, we didn't get it by the time she was 2, our performance went skyrocketing, right? Our performance is so much better because I'm not pressuring myself at that point.
Yeah, I think that's usually the case.
Yeah.
So when you see people come into your class or starting at their first trial, what's the kind of most common mistake you see people make that they can maybe hear?
And it's one that I made. Because this is an independent thinking exercise, shut up.
Yeah.
Your dog knows what they're doing if you've got your foundations in there. And that's something I stress, is don't try to push your dog past the foundation levels until they have that 100%. So that's a mistake there, but shut up. Every time that you tell your dog to search or find it or sook or whatever word you're using, or check here, check here, check here, check here, you're taking your dog out of the mindset of searching. I'm really bad for it. I'm a nervous talker. I'm a talker, obviously, but I'm a nervous talker in trials, and I will basically commentate through the whole thing.
Yeah.
I have actually gone into a trial and put a piece of tape over my mouth to remind myself to shut up.
Yeah.
I've done some training. And I actually, one thing when you're training, video.
Yeah.
Because I have one student in particular who I absolutely adore that did not realize she was constantly talking to her dog.
Yeah.
And it was so cute. So I videotaped her and then showed her, and she's like, I didn't do that. I'm like, you did. It's right here. Yeah, so, and I did the same thing. I would constantly be talking to my dog. I've lost points because I've gone, oh, my leash went under my dog's leg, so I lost points for leash handling, right? The judge didn't see it because they were busy writing something else down, but because I said it, they knocked a point off for me, right? But the biggest thing is not to take your dog out of their search, right? The more you talk at them while they're working, the less they actually can focus on what they're doing. So biggest thing is to be quiet and let your dog work.
Well, that's interesting because I've done more on the barn hunt side, and it's sort of a similar idea. But I know I gab a lot when we practice, but obviously in a competition, I'm not talking that much. So even just the difference between like, oh, I'm practice, I don't care, we're chatting with the instructor, and then we go compete and it's dead silence. I think like, oh, that's a big change for my dog to kind of work through if they're used to me jabbering, not at them, but.
And that's actually a really, really good point, is train like you're going to trial. And that's something we all forget. And it's a great thing to point out. You need to train as if you were trialing. So I do trial prep classes. I'll do a drop-in for a weekend kind of thing where people can come and experience as if it is an actual trial. And it's super important for those kinds of things. Because when you change something, like you said, you're chatting away with your instructor's giving you feedback, and then all of a sudden it's dead quiet. It's like, oh, this is weird. And your dog's like, I don't know what to do now. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Okay. And we're not running out of time, but I want to be mindful of your time here. So I guess one thing I find always gives me nerves, and I think gives other people nerves when we're competing at a trial, is worrying about not having the right stuff, or we get there and we realize we don't have the right stuff. So what would you recommend somebody take with them to their first trial? What do they need to have on them?
Well, first off, I want them to listen to your benching podcast, because that's incredibly important. Learn how to bench your dog. Man, I wish I had that before I started. And actually, I've recommended the podcast to a number of my students because they've never competed. And that one right there is huge. Learn how to bench your dog and the best place for your dog. When you're competing in SDDA or CKC, or pretty much any of them, know the equipment that you're going to wear. So either a flat buckle collar or a non-tightening harness. Bring your reward. And this is incredibly important, whether it's food or a toy. You need to have that reward, and it has to be the reward. Like, what would you do for a Klondike bar reward? Your dog has to go absolutely crazy for it. Pardon?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. What would you do for a Klondike bar? Because if you're giving them the same reward that you do when you ask them to sit, they're like, dude, really? It's like the supermodels in the 90s. They're not going to get out of bed for more than $10,000. It's the same thing with scent detection, because they're the ones doing all the work. You're not telling them what to do. So the reward needs to be higher. So bring that reward. The only time my dog gets bacon is at a trial. And she's not a really food-driven dog. She's a toy-driven dog. So I'm a little forgetful sometimes. Bacon is easy. I go to Tim Hortons, I get an a la carte bacon, and I have my rewards for the trial. But for her, that's just an intermittent reward, going from one odor to the next. She'll get bacon when she finds something, and when I've cleared the room and I'm done, she gets her toy, which is what she lives for. So bring your best reward. And other than that, bring a chair, because you're usually outside.
Long days.
Bring some snacks, bring water for yourself and your dog, and just bring a good attitude. Talk to the other people at the trial. One thing that I do recommend, if you're not ready to compete or don't feel you're ready to compete, or you're nervous about competing for the first time, volunteer. It's a wonderful way to see how the trials work. A lot of the times you'll get to see the other dogs working. So for me, that was a big thing entering my first trial, is I'd never seen other dogs work. So when I realized I could no longer compete with this particular dog, the next trial I went to, I just volunteered. I didn't even have a dog that I was training at the time. I was still waiting for my puppy to be born. So I didn't have a competition dog. So I volunteered. I'm like, do you need any help? What do you want me to do? And I ended up getting to see a lot of the other dogs work. So one thing with that, you get to, and I'm a little off topic here, but you'll get to see what your goals are going to be, how you want your dog to perform, but you're also going to see the other mistakes, which is invaluable. And it's got nothing, like, I'm not trying to diminish anybody else's training or capacity, but learning from mistakes is absolutely invaluable. So, but best thing, the biggest thing, aside from your reward and your equipment, is bring a great attitude and just have some fun.
Well, I think I'm glad you brought up the volunteering, because I think that is a massive help. And it sounds like you're saying it in a, not you, but I'll say myself, saying it in a mean way, but it really isn't. I think sometimes it's a massive confidence boost to go in and you see other people make mistakes and you're like, okay, they're not that much better than me almost. Like, it's like, okay, I am at that level. Like, they're making mistakes too. It's okay, kind of thing.
Absolutely, because I went in thinking that everybody won everything all the time.
Yes.
And because I didn't get to see their performances, I beat myself up over it because I'm the one that's supposed to know how to do this.
Right.
So when I made mistakes, right, I'd be sitting in my Jeep afterwards going, man, I suck.
Yeah.
But we all do at
Yeah.
a certain level, right? And we're all going to make mistakes. So like you said, seeing that, it just makes it more, I guess, humanized.
Yeah.
And you realize that it's okay. It's okay if you don't win everything. It's okay if you make a mistake. If you don't make a mistake, you're not going to learn.
Yeah. And it's a hard sport because you really, I think you've touched on this a few times already, but you really have to trust your dog. So there's so much, it's led by them. So it's kind of not the blind leading the blind, but you really have to trust your dog a lot to compete in a sport like this.
Absolutely. It's really the only sport out there other than tracking, which is a form of nose work, that your dog is not performing a trained set of skills. Your dog is acting independently. It's probably, that's one of the reasons it's my favorite is, and it's the same with barn hunt. Your dog is acting very independently on that, but again, it's a form of nose work. You can't see what they smell.
Yeah.
And you trust your dog. You have to trust your dog, even if they lie to you.
Yeah.
And, you know, or they get frustrated and they decide to indicate regardless, you still need to trust your dog.
Yeah. You don't have another option. So
nope. And it's a different bond. I find it's a different bond after you've trained through scent detection. I find it's a very different bond with your dog because they're learning that they can tell you something versus you telling them something.
Right. Okay, I'm just quickly running through the last of my questions I had. So I guess we kind of talked about when you're ready, but when would you not recommend somebody, or when would you tell somebody maybe you're not ready yet to compete? Or is there a time?
There is. If I think somebody's going in with the intention of winning everything and their dog's not ready, I will definitely say, you know what, let's sit this one out, go volunteer, see the other dogs. Let's work on these issues before you enter that ring. Because if somebody has set those expectations, and we're all different, we're all gonna look at it a different way. If somebody has those expectations, they're going to go in, they're going to be disappointed. And I've actually lost students because they've gone in too early with too high of an expectation. Yeah. Because they get discouraged, and it's so easy to do when you don't win everything and you think you're going to. And
it's a 6-week class. Why isn't my dog perfect? Why didn't we pass everything the first time?
So, and that's one thing that I tell them, because I bring my dog in as a demo.
Yeah.
And the first thing I tell them, even before I bring my dog in, is you are learning first aid. My dog is a neurosurgeon. Right? If you want the comparison. And my dog's not really a neurosurgeon, you're that good. But just as the comparison, if you're learning first aid, you're not going to perform brain surgery.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to show you what the final goal is, but let's work through these steps first. And you know what? There are some dogs that are ready after 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I've seen them go in and clean up. Yeah. But it depends on the dog. It depends on the level of experience of the handler with training other sports. It depends on so many things. And I've seen brand new dogs go through a 6-week course and be ready to compete. Wow. Just because the owner gets it, the dog gets it. But that's not the norm by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Okay. Again, just being mindful of your time here. Is there anything I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to mention?
God, I could talk about this forever. This is my passion, obviously. Scent detection, like I said, I find it so fascinating. And because you are relying on a sense that your dog has that you don't, it is the ultimate of throwing. It's like the trust jump off a cliff and waiting for people to catch you, right? You're trusting your dog, and for me, it's one of the most fascinating sports out there.
Yeah. It seems like I don't want to discourage people saying this, but it seems like it could take a lifetime to learn the theory behind the scent, how it moves, and just there's so much to it.
There is, and there's it's like with a lot of things, is you can learn the basics very quickly, but to master it is a lifetime. I still learn new things every day. Every new dog that I teach gives me a new problem to solve, and I love that. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly listening to podcasts from the professional aspect and the sporting aspect, and there's so much information out there. And sifting through that, because not all of it necessarily applies to you, your dog, or your sport. But it's a constant learning experience, which is something I absolutely love. You will never master it 100% because you're relying on another sentient being to perform for you. So you're never going to master it, which is, to me, one of the most attractive things about it. Yeah, because it's constantly striving for the next level.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for joining us. If people want to learn more about you or sign up with a class with you, where can they go to learn more?
So I currently am working on my website. It's not up yet, but I do teach through Hightails, so hightails.ca. Hightails is all one word. I teach out there mostly on Fridays, and you can sign up for my classes there. And as for learning about me, I'll get my website up eventually. And check out Hightails. It's such a great facility. I love teaching out there. It's wonderful. But yeah, and check out the SDDA.ca website. The CKC has their rules up. ABC Games, UKC trials. You can check them all out and see which one appeals to you the most, and CWAGs as well. And super fun.
I'll try and share all those links at the bottom of this video so people can find it. And when your website's ready, you can send that to me too, and I'll add.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and thanks to everybody for tuning in and listening. I got a lot out of this, so I can't thank you enough for coming on. That was really, really great, I think.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, because I love to share my passion.
Yeah. It's us crazy dog people, we love to talk about it. So, anyway. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thanks, Megan.